At a crowded garage on Michigan Avenue, Aaliyah, the youngest and only female mechanic there, was constantly looked down on by her co-workers. Things got worse when a heavily tattooed Hells Angels biker walked in, begging for urgent repairs so he could reach the hospital to save his injured daughter. Everyone in the garage turned their backs, except Aaliyah, who stepped up to help. That decision cost her job when the manager fired her unfairly. But no one expected that the biker was the CEO's brother. And from that moment, everything would change. Before we dive deeper into this story, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so I can share more exciting stories with you tomorrow. It was another restless morning on Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago. The kind of morning where car horns blended with the hiss of buses pulling to the pound curb and the sharp echo of construction tools striking steel. Inside Brown's auto garage, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above rows of half-dismantled cars and stacks of greasy toolboxes. The smell of gasoline, rubber, and burnt coffee lingered heavy in the air. Engines coughed, wrenches clanked, laughter broke out in pockets of the shop. But in one corner, bent low under the hood of a beat-up Chevy 1-year-old, Aaliyah Brown was already drenched in sweat. She didn't have time for chatter. She didn't have time for jokes. She was here to work. Aaliyah was the youngest mechanic in the shop, the only woman, and she knew exactly how every eye measured her. Rookie, that was what they called her. Rookie, when they needed someone to crawl under an oil slick chassis. Rookie, when there was a busted axle too heavy for one man to lift. Rookie, when the job meant grime that wouldn't wash off your hands for days. She wore the title like armor, though it cut every time it left their mouths. Aaliyah's coveralls were navy blue, stained darker in streaks across her knees and chest. The name Brown stitched over her pocket. Her hair was tied back, tight, a few curls escaping onto her temples, sweat making them stick. She pushed her wrench hard into place, jaw set, eyes narrowed. She wasn't just fixing cars. She was holding her place in a room that didn't want her. "Hey, rookie," one of the older techs shouted from across the shop, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Bring me the 3/4 socket. Chop chop." He tossed a rag in her direction, like he was throwing a bone to a dog. The others chuckled. Another voice added, "She's good with her hands, you know. Runs in the family." More laughter. Aaliyah rolled out from under the Chevy slowly, her back sore, her palms black with grease. She didn't answer. She never did. She walked straight to the wall of tools, pulled down the socket, and handed it over, without a word. The man smirked, already, turning away victory in his silence. He went back to her bay and returned to work. Inside, her chest burned, but on the outside, she was stoned. It was always the same, day in, day out. The only time the manager, Mr. Reynolds, ever noticed her was when something went wrong. He never came by when she beat the deadline on a repair. Never said a word when a customer drove away happy, but missed one minor detail. Let a bolt go loose or a tire pressure slip, and his voice cut across the floor like a whip. "Brown, you call that?" Finished in front of everyone as if humiliation was part of her paycheck. She learned to stay quiet. She learned to keep moving. It didn't mean she didn't feel it. It didn't mean she didn't dream. Aaliyah wanted her own shop someday, a place with her name painted bold across the sign, a shop where people like her could come work without waiting for permission to be respected. But for now, this was her reality. Early mornings, double shifts, the rookie no one believed in, the one they'd push to the bottom every chance they got. Her mother worked nights at the hospital, bills stacked up on the kitchen counter, rent never got cheaper. Aaliyah had no choice but to keep showing up, to keep turning wrenches, like her life depended on it. And maybe it did. The shop buzzed around her with lazy motion. Two mechanics leaned against a car hood, sipping oversized mugs of coffee. Someone had their phone out laughing at a video. The radio cracked through static with an old rock station. The rhythm of the garage moved, like an old tired machine, gears clanking, oil leaking but still pushing forward. And in the middle of it, Aaliyah carved. Her own rhythm, focused, sharp, relentless. Every twist of her wrist said what her mouth didn't. Every bolt tightened was proof that she belonged. Here, even if no one admitted it, she knew the truth, though. Belonging didn't come from skill in this place. It came from being part of the club. And she wasn't. She never would be. That thought pressed heavy on her, but she refused to break. She gripped the wrench tighter. She had learned long ago not to let them see her flinch. Another mechanic strolled by her bay, shaking his head. "Rookie works like she's saving the world," he muttered, low enough to sting, loud enough for others to laugh. Aaliyah kept her eyes on the bolt, turning until the click gave her what she wanted. She set the wrench down, wiped her forehead with her sleeve, and exhaled. She wasn't saving the world. She was saving herself. Outside the shop doors, traffic surged along Michigan Avenue. Taxis, honking delivery trucks, blocking lanes, pedestrians streaming past in heavy coats. Winter sunlight cut through the tall glass buildings, spilling weak light into the shop. It lit Aaliyah's bay, just enough to catch the determination in her eyes. She didn't hear the jokes anymore. She didn't hear the radio. He didn't hear the laughter from across the shop. What she heard was the voice inside her, steady and certain. Keep going. Keep pushing. The next morning, ChatGPT Danoi, the garage door creaked open. The chime above it, barely audible, over the noise of impact wrenches and clattering tools. But something in the way the sound hit made heads turn for a one. The moment before, quickly looking away. Again, a man stepped inside, boots heavy, on the concrete shoulders, broad beneath, a leather jacket worn thin and cracked. Along the seams, the patch on the back caught the fluorescent light bold, letters stitched in red and white. Hells Angels. That alone was enough to shift the air. Conversations dipped, laughter trailed off, and customers in the waiting area stiffened as if danger had just walked in. His chest rose and fell, fast, breath, uneven, voice already straining, as he moved to the counter. "Please," he said, short and urgent. "I need help. My bike, it won't start. My daughter, she's at the hospital. She had an accident, internal bleeding. They called me. She's in critical condition. I need to get there now." His words tumbled out like a flood roar and cracked with panic. For a second, there was only silence, the kind of silence that hangs heavier than noise. And then the receptionist, Kim, leaned back in her chair, tapping her nails against the desk like she hadn't heard the tremor in his voice at all. "Take a seat," she said flatly, eyes still on her phone. "Someone will get to you when they get to you." The biker shook his head, stepped closer, hand pressed on the counter like he was holding himself steady. "I don't have time to wait. I just need someone to look at it, just a few minutes. Whatever it takes, please. I'll pay whatever it costs." Kim didn't even look up. "Everyone's got somewhere to be," she snapped. Behind him, a customer in a pressed suit leaned toward his wife, whispered low, but loud enough for others to hear. "Jesus, what's he doing here?" Another man shifted uneasily in his chair, set his coffee down, and stood muttering, "I don't feel safe with that guy around." He grabbed his coat and left the door swinging shut behind to him. The biker's eyes darted around the room, catching the way people pulled back from him, the way no one met his gaze, the way mechanics suddenly busied themselves with anything but him. He knew the look. He'd seen it all his life. The look that judged the jacket, the tattoos, the patches long before it. Listened to the words. He rubbed his hand down his face, fingers trembling, and let out a harsh breath. "Please, I just need a jump. Maybe a quick fix. She's my little girl. I can't miss this." His voice cracked at the end, almost breaking. but the sympathy never came. One of the techs in the corner let out a laugh, shaking his head. Should have called an uber tough guy. Another smirked. Yeah, can't scare your way to the front of the line here. The words landed sharp, and the biker stepped back, shoulders slumping under the weight of the police dismissal. He turned slightly toward the interlifing 5 Alown, door phone in hand, ready to call a cab, ready to give up on the only chance he had of making it in time. His lips pressed together, jaw-tight eyes, burning, but not from rage, from something closer to despair. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for mercy. And there wasn't any here. Aaliyah noticed from under the raised hood of the Chevy. She had been watching, hearing every word, feeling the room tighten around him like a trap. She saw the panic in his face, the way he kept glancing at the door. Like every second wasted here was another second stolen from his daughter. She knew that look, not exactly, but close enough. To look of someone being judged before being heard. The same look that followed at her down aisles at the grocery store. The same look that told her to stay quiet, to stay small, to accept less. Her heart thudded hard in her chest, not from fear, but from the weight of it. The biker's hand hovered over his phone. His head bowed slightly as though the fight had drained out of him. He muttered, "She's just a kid. God, please." But it was so soft, most pretended not to hear. The room shifted, back to its rhythm, the whir of tools, the buzz of chatter, as if he'd been swallowed up and made invisible. Kim typed something on her keyboard nails, tapping sharp, her voice flat again as she called out to no one in particular. Next customer. The biker stood there, a statue of rejection, and the message was clear. He wasn't wanted. He took another step toward the door. His shoulders rounded like a man shrinking into himself. People watched, whispering, "Threat," someone said under their breath. "Thug." He clenched his jaw, his eyes glassy, swallowed hard. He was about to walk out, to let the weight of their judgment push him into the cold, when a voice cut through the noise, calm and clear. "Hey, wait up." Every head turned surprised. Aaliyah stood near her, workbench, rag in one hand, bottle of water in the other, grease still streaking her sleeves. She wasn't loud, she wasn't dramatic, but her words sliced through the haze of contempt like a clean break. The biker stopped, his eyes flicking toward her, uncertain. She took a step closer, steady. "What kind of bike?" she asked. The room froze. A ripple of disbelief moved through it, and then the laughter came sharp and mocking. "Look at that," one mechanic barked. "Rookie wants to save the biker." Another voice followed. "She thinks she's Captain Hero now." Kim rolled her eyes and muttered, "Unbelievable." Customers shook their heads, shifting uncomfortably, but no one offered help. The only sound that mattered was Aaliyah's voice, steady, direct. "Tell me," she said again. The biker blinked, caught off guard by the simple human question. "Harley won't crank ignitions. Dead, parked right outside." His voice cracked on the last word, like saying it out loud, reminded him how little time he had. Aaliyah nodded once, already, moving the rag shoved in her pocket, the water bottle extended toward him. "You look like hell, man. Drink." He hesitated, then took at his throat dry, and his hand shaking. He looked at her like he didn't know if he should thank her or warn her, but gratitude won out. "Thanks." My kid. She took a bad fall," they said. "Surgery. I can't lose her." She crouched by the door, glancing out at the Harley sitting at the curb. "Might be. Quick. 10 minutes, maybe less. 10 minutes I'll take," he whispered, hope flickering for the first time since he walked in. Behind them, a voice rang out, dripping with sarcasm. "Look at Brown wasting her time. You're going to regret that, rookie." Laughter followed. Again, cruel and careless. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She didn't turn. She reached into her toolbox, pulled what she needed, and stepped toward the door, without waiting for permission. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, but her hands were steady. She wasn't helping him because she pied him. She was helping because she knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible in a room full of people. The biker followed, eyes still darting back, wary of being asked to leave again, wary of one more rejection. But Aaliyah was already at the bike, kneeling down, scanning the ignition, moving with precision as if the world behind her didn't exist. For the first time that morning, he felt seen. The voices rose behind her, sharper now, no longer hidden under half-hearted jokes, but laced with warning. One of the older techs, a man who had been in the shop longer than she had been alive, stepped forward, his voice low, but meant for everyone to hear. "Brown, don't touch that bike. You don't know what you're getting into. Hell's Angels don't just walk in here. There are rules. You don't lay a hand on anything without a ticket, signed by Reynolds." He crossed his arms, the weight of his authority pressing against her, trying to pin her down. Another mechanic chimed in. "He's right. Don't be stupid. Those guys bring nothing but trouble. You fix his bike. You own his problems. Walk away while you can." Aaliyah didn't look back. Her hands were already moving, pulling open a side panel, eyes scanning wires, every sense locked on the machine in front of her. She heard them every word, but her heart was louder. "You're asking for it? Rookie," another voice muttered, almost mocking, but tinged with unease. "Reynolds finds out you're done. Don't say we didn't warn you." Laughter followed, but it was uneasy, shaky at the edges. Beneath the smirks, there was fear. Fear of the jacket, fear of the patch, fear of the weight, the name, carried outside these walls. The biker stood a step behind her, shifting, uncomfortably torn between telling her to stop and praying she wouldn't. He knew what it meant when people saw him, what doors closed, what voices turned sharp. He didn't want to drag her into, didn't want to see her take the bitely blow meant for him. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, voice cracking. Again. But she didn't lift her eyes from Selm. "The engine." "I do," Aaliyah answered, calm. "Even." She tightened a screw, tested. Wire, the rhythm of her hands steady. "I was raised to help people. That's not something I ask permission for." The words cut clean through the shop, leaving silence for a beat too long. The older mechanic scoffed, shaking his head. "Being good won't save you here. This isn't Sunday school. This is a business. You followed the chain, or you're out." Aaliyah finally straightened, turning her head just enough to meet his eyes, her expression firm. "I'm not here to play politics. He needs to get to his daughter. That's all that matters." The biker's throat tightened. He had expected to be turned away, expected another door slammed shut, but instead, here was this girl, half his age, with every reason to protect herself, standing in the storm, without flinching. Around them, the other mechanics shifted uncomfortably, muttering, glancing toward the office, where Reynolds might appear at any second. No one dared to touch the bike. No one dared to help, but no one dared to step in front of Aaliyah either. They had thrown their warnings, their cynicism, their fear at her, and she hadn't moved. She crouched again, fingers working, mind locked in. The biker whispered almost to himself, "Why?" Aaliyah didn't pause. "Because doing nothing is worse than being wrong. Because I couldn't sleep at night if I watched you walk out of here without trying." She tested the connection. Sparks flickered. The engine coughed. Her lips pressed together in focus. But, inside, she felt the weight of what she had said. It wasn't just about him. It was about every time she had been told to stay small. Every time her worth had been measured against rules that never bent for her behind her. The warnings, he didn't stop. She's going to regret it. Someone muttered. Reynolds will eat her, alive. Another shook his head, muttering, under his breath. Kids throwing her future away for a lost cause. But Aaliyah's hands kept moving her resolve. Iron. She wasn't doing this for approval. Not from Reynolds, not from the shop, not even from the man standing, desperate behind her. She was doing it. However, because her conscience didn't bend with convenience, she had been taught since she was a child that if someone fell, you reached down. If someone cried, you. If someone begged, you tried. And no job, no rule, no fear of authority was strong enough to erase that. The biker swallowed hard, his voice rough when he spoke again. You're risking everything. Aaliyah's eyes flicked up, steady, unshaken. Some things are worth it. And then the engine roared faintly, struggling but alive, proof that her choice, reckless or not, was already changing the moment. The mutters behind her grew quieter. The judgment didn't vanish, but the uncertainty cracked. She had crossed the line, and she knew there was no turning back. She turned a screw tighter, wiped her forehead with the back of her sleeve, and spoke without looking at anyone. You all can call it foolish. I call it being human. ChatGPT Doi. The air thickened. Before Aaliyah even had the chance to test the ignition again, the weight of it crawling across her shoulders like a storm about to break, and then it did. The sharp clap of leather soles on concrete, a voice already raised, slicing through the garage noise like a siren. What the hell is going on here? Mr. Reynolds' words came fast, tight, and venomous, his face hard with the kind of anger that had been simmering long before this moment, the kind of anger that needed only a spark. He shoved past. Tutek's eyes locked on Aaliyah, crouched beside the Harley. Brown, he spat her name like it tasted bitter in his mouth. What the hell do you think you're doing? Every wrench stilled, every murmur dropped the garage, falling into the manchage, kind of silence that only comes when everyone knows a fight is seconds away from erupting. Aaliyah straightened, rag in hand, her jaw tense, but her eyes steady, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. I'm fixing his bike, she said, her voice calm, measured, refusing to bend, even as her chest burned. Reynolds barked a blind, humorless laugh. Fixing his bike. You don't touch anything without a ticket. You know that. Procedure, chain of command. Who gave you authorization? He gestured toward the biker, standing a few feet behind her, sweat dripping from his temple, desperation clinging to him. This clown, this isn't a customer. This is a problem. Walking into my shop. Ray's jaw clenched the words, hitting him harder than fists. He opened his mouth to speak, but Reynolds cut him off with a sneer. Save it. I know you're kind. Leather jackets, patches, ink up your neck. You walk in here looking like a threat and think people should drop everything for you. Not in my shop. Not today. Not ever. A murmur rippled across the mechanics, some smirking, others glancing down, too cowardly to challenge him, but no one dared to speak. Aaliyah's voice came sharp this time. He's not a threat. He's a father trying to get to his daughter in the hospital. He told you what happened. He doesn't need your judgment. He needs help. Reynolds turned on her eyes, narrowed, lip curling. And you think you're the one to give it. You think you know better than the rest of us, better than me. You're a rookie, Brown, a damn kid. You do what you're told. That's the only reason you've lasted this long. And now, you want to throw it away for some biker trash. Rye stepped forward, voice low but steady, his chest heaving. Don't talk about me like that. Reynolds' head snapped toward him, his expression twisting. Or what? You going to start something in here in front of families? You people are all the same. Ride in. Scare folks, act like the world owes you something. You think this patch on your back makes you special. All it makes you is dangerous. All it makes you is a Blakenstreet thug. The words hit like stones thrown into an already broken window, each one sharper than the last. Ray's fists clenched, his breath catching in his throat, but he held still for his daughter's sake. For the promise of time he couldn't afford to lose. Aaliyah's chest burned hotter, the insult digging into her as much as it did into him. She took a step forward, voice rising steady but shaking at the stubble edges with fury. That's enough. You don't know him. You don't know his life. You don't get to stand here and strip people down because of how they look. Reynolds' eyes snapped back to her, his voice dropping low, dangerous, every word dripping with disdain. Watch your mouth. You think standing up for him makes you noble. It makes you naive. You're nothing here, Brown, nothing but a black girl trying to play mechanic in a man's shop. And you will never be anything else. The garage froze, the silence now suffocating every pair of eyes locked on them, no one daring to breathe. Aaliyah felt her stomach drop, her skin crawl, her throat tighten, but her eyes never left his. He had cut deep, but she refused to bleed for him. Her voice came back steady, defiant, louder than she thought possible. I earned my place here. Every bolt, every wrench, every damn hour I put in, and I'm not about to let you tell me I don't belong because I'm black or because I'm a woman. You don't get to decide my worth. Not you. Not anyone. Reynolds stepped closer. Close enough. She could smell the bitterness on his breath, his voice spitting venom. You want to talk about worth? You're worth nothing to me. You're done. Pack your tools. You're fired. Right here, right now. The words slammed into her chest, final and heavy, but she stood still, her jaw clenched, her heart pounding so loud it drowned the garage's silence. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just stared back, eyes locked, refusing to break. Ray's voice broke through, rough, desperate, raw. Don't do this. She didn't do anything wrong. She was the only one, willing to help when everyone else turned their backs. Fire me if you want someone to blame, but don't punish her and for doing the right thing. Reynolds snapped his head toward him, rage bubbling higher. I don't owe you explanations, biker. You don't belong here. You walked in and turned my shop upside down. You don't get to stand in my face and tell me how to run it. You're nothing but a headache wrapped in leather. Get out before I throw you out, myself. Ray's jaw locked tight, his body shaking from the effort it took to stay silent, to keep from snapping, to keep from giving Reynolds exactly the image he wanted to see. A threat? A monster? He swallowed hard, lowering his eyes for a second before lifting them again. Steady, cold. You don't see people, you only see what you want to hate. Reynolds sneered the insult, rolling off him like it was fuel. Spare me your speeches. You're lucky I don't call the cops and have you dragged out of here. The mechanics shifted, uncomfortable now, the heat of Reynolds' words burning them, too. But none moved, none spoke. Fear held them tighter than loyalty ever could. Aaliyah's voice came again, quiet, but unshakable. Her body trembling, but her spirit steady. You're wrong about him, about me, about everything. And one day, you'll see it, even if it's not today. Reynolds jabbed a finger toward the door, his voice booming. Get out, Brown. You and your biker friend, you're finished here. You'll never work in this shop again. Aaliyah stared back one last time, the sting of his words still raw, the weight of his hate pressing heavy, but inside something colder, sharper, stronger rose, acceptance not of his verdict, but of her choice. She turned, wiping her hands on her coveralls, her voice low but steady. I can live with losing this job. I couldn't live with losing myself. Ray looked at her eyes, filled with something unspoken, something between apology and gratitude. She shook her head, once silent and reached out her hand. He took it grip, solid, a brief connection of shared understanding, and then let go. The shop remained frozen. No cheers, no defense, no sympathy, just silence and judgment, hanging in the air. Reynolds turned back, toward his office, muttering under his breath, "Pathetic." And just like that, it was done. Aaliyah had been cast out. Ray had been branded a threat, and the garage, once buzzing with laughter, returned to its rhythm as if nothing had happened at all, as if the moment meant nothing. But for Aaliyah, for Ray, it meant everything. For them, nothing would ever be the same. Ray stood there, for a moment, hands still balled into fists, though the fight had already left him. His chest rose and fell with sharp breaths that refused to settle, and his eyes darted once toward the door, as if leaving might erase the weight of what had just happened. But then they fell, back on her, on the young woman who had stood in front of him when no one else had dared, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words scraping out of his throat like gravel. "I didn't mean for you to get caught in this. I didn't mean to cost you your job." His voice cracked on the last word, guilt wrapping around it, until it hung heavy in the air. Aaliyah shifted, the rag in her hands, her shoulders still tight from the storm Reynolds had thrown at her. But when she looked up at Ray, her expression wasn't bitter. Her eyes were tired, but clear. "Don't apologize," she said, steady, as if the words had been waiting for her. "This isn't on you. You came in here asking for help. That's not a crime. That's not wrong. What happened? That's on them, not you." Ray's lips pressed into a line, his jaw working, his gaze dropping to the floor. "But you paid the price. I walked in, and they saw me. Not the man, not the father, just the jacket, the tattoos, the patch, and then you." His words faltered, his chest tight, and he let out a bitter laugh that wasn't amusement at all. "You stepped in, and now you're the one paying for it. I've lived with this kind of thing my whole life, but you shouldn't have to carry that because of me." Aaliyah let the silence stretch for a moment long, enough that the humming of an air compressor in the corner filled the Bronder, space between them long enough that the shame in his voice settled. She finally spoke low but firm. "You don't get to take this on yourself. I knew what I was doing. I knew what it would cost me. Maybe not exactly like this, but I knew, and I'd do it again because I wasn't raised to turn my back on someone who needed help. I don't know any other way to be." Ray looked at her, then really, he looked as though trying to reconcile the truth of her words with the reality he'd just seen. He had expected anger, bitterness, regret, but instead he found conviction, a calmness he hadn't known could exist in a place so harsh. His throat tightened, his voice softer when he spoke again. "You remind me of my kid," he said, almost a whisper. "She's only 12, tough as nails, stubborn as hell, but she's got a heart like yours, always trying to help, even when it costs her. She's lying in a hospital bed right now, and all I could think was getting there before it was too late. When they all looked at me like I was dirt, I thought I'd already lost. And then you." He stopped, swallowing hard, unable to finish. Aaliyah's chest HD at the words, not out of pity, but out of recognition. She thought of her mother, the long night shifts, the quiet strength it took to keep going, when no one saw it, when no one gave thanks. She thought of every moment she'd been told she didn't belong, and how easy it would have been to believe it. She met Ray's eyes and said quietly, "You're not dirt. You're a father who loves his daughter. That's all I saw. That's all that mattered." For a second, Ray couldn't breathe. He had heard 1,000 insults, and in his life, been called every name the world could throw at him. But he I couldn't remember the last time someone stripped all of that away and left only the truth. His voice broke when he said, "Thank you." Aaliyah shook her head, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Don't thank me. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right, because if it were me, if it were my mom or my brother, I'd hope someone would do the same." Ray nodded slowly, the words sinking deep. He looked at her with a kind of respect he usually reserved for the road, for the men he rode with, for the rare souls who stood firm when everyone else folded. "You've got more guts than anyone in this place," he said, quietly. "They'll never admit it, but you do." Aaliyah felt a lump in her throat, not from pride, but from the honesty in his voice. She glanced around. The garage once more, the mechanics back to their work, pretending not to watch. The receptionist typing with nails, tapping like a drum, the customers whispering but not intervening. None of them would remember her as brave. Most would only remember her as foolish. But, standing here in this moment with this old man looking at her like she mattered, that was enough. She exhaled slowly, the weight of the morning pressing on her shoulders but not breaking them. "I can live with losing this job," she said, softly. "What I couldn't live with is walking away from someone who needed me. I'd rather carry the weight of being fired than the weight of doing nothing." Ray closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink into him, like a balm he hadn't known he needed. When he opened them again, there was a clarity there, a steadiness that hadn't been there when he first walked in. He extended his hand, rough, callous, marked by years on the road. She looked at it, then at him, and then took it without hesitation. The handshake was brief, solid, but it carried more than any words could. "You're a good one," he said, quietly, almost reverently. "Don't let them tell you otherwise." Aaliyah held his gaze, her grip firm, her voice steady. "And you're not the monster they want you to be. Don't let them tell you otherwise either." The two of them stood there for a heartbeat longer, bound not by pity or debt, but by something simpler, something stronger, recognition. Two people who the world had tried to make invisible, standing together in defiance of that invisibility. When they finally let go, the weight in the room shifted just slightly, but enough. Ray stepped toward the door, pausing long enough to glance back at her. His voice was low, rough, but grateful. "I'll make it to her in time. Because of you." Aaliyah gave a single nod. "Nothing more, nothing less. Go," she said. "She needs you." And with that, he pushed through the door into the cold Chicago air, swallowed by the noise of Michigan Avenue, the roar of traffic, the blur of Carty lives rushing by. Aaliyah stood where she was, her chest rising steady, her hands still marked by grease, her heart steady in the knowledge that she had chosen right, even if the world refused to see it. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. She felt human. ChatGPT Denoy Aaliyah walked home that evening with the wind biting at her face, the sky already dimming into the long Chicago winter night, her duffel bag heavy on her shoulder. Though she had left most of her tools behind, she had not even realized she was walking slower than usual until she reached her block and saw the lights in, the windows warm squares against the duocased, dark. Her feet carried her up the cracked steps of the walk-up she shared with her mother, her chest still tight from the way the day had ended, but her mind strangely clear, stripped of certainty of this, everything, but the simple knowledge that she had done what she believed was right. She pushed the door open, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the radiator, and dropped her bag by the couch. The weight hit the floor with a dull thud. For the first time since morning, she exhaled fully, but clarity did not quiet the ache. She sat at the edge of the couch, elbows on her knees, face buried in her hands for a long moment, letting the exhaustion wash over her. She could still hear Reynolds's voice in her ears, the bite of his words, the finality of, "You're done." She could still see the look on the Amenti faces around her, men who had worked or beside her for years, standing silent, watching her be humiliated and discarded, like she was nothing. And yet, beneath the sting, there was something else. Something she could not name at first, but that grew the longer she sat in the panic silence. It was pride. Quiet, steady, dangerous pride. She had chosen not to bend, not to back down. She had chosen to be human, and she could live with that. The night passed in restless fragments, sleep slipping in and out, her mind replaying every detail. By morning, she had convinced herself she would go back to the shop just to collect the rest of her things. Nothing more. She told herself she needed closure, a clean break. When she stepped outside, the city was just waking steam, rising from manholes, buses hissing at their stops, the metallic rhythm of the L in the distance. She walked without hurry, though her heart thudded faster, the closer she got to Michigan Avenue. The garage looked the same as always, glass front dulled with city grime, fluorescent lights flickering against rows of cars inside. For a moment, standing across the street, she felt a pang of unreality. Had it really happened yesterday? Had her life really tilted that hard? In just a handful of 70 minutes, she tightened the strap of her bag and crossed. When she reached the door, she froze. A note was taped against the glass, written in black marker, hurried but clear. Her name scrolled across the top. Below it, come back to the shop immediately. CEO. Her pulse spiked. She read it once, twice, then a third time, making sure it was real. Her first thought was suspicion, a prank, another way to humiliate her. But the handwriting was unfamiliar, and something about the urgency of it, the lack of embellishment, didn't fit the cruel humor of her co-workers. She stood there for a long second, people brushing past her on the sidewalk, until her hand finally pressed against the door. Inside, the shop was quieter than usual, this kind of quiet that carries tension. Mechanics clustered near the far end of the room, not laughing, not drinking coffee, their voices low and eyes darting toward the office hallway. Even Kim, the receptionist, was silent, her gums snapping slower than normal, her eyes fixed on her screen, but her shoulders tight. Aaliyah's steps echoed against the concrete floor as she walked toward the hallway, each one heavier than the last. At the end of the hall, the double doors to the conference room stood open, lights spilling out. A voice called her name, deep, measured, commanding. Aaliyah Brown. Come in. She stepped inside. The air smelled of coffee and leather polish, a mix of tension and formality. At the far end of the table stood Thomas Ellison, the CEO of the garage chain. She had seen him only twice before, both times during scheduled site visits, when everyone scrubbed the place spotless, when Reynolds had practically bowed to him. But he looked different now. He wasn't in a suit. His sleeves were rolled, his eyes dark and tired, his jaw set like the man who hadn't slept but refused to show weakness. And beside him, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, was the biker Ray. The same leather jacket hung from his shoulders, the same patch blazing across his back, but his face was steady now. No panic, no desperation. He met her eyes and gave the faintest nod, not a smile but a recognition. Aaliyah froze in the doorway, unsure what this meant, unsure what waited for her in the space between them. She looked from Rye to Ellison, her chest tight. Ellison gestured to a coal chair. Sit down. She moved slowly, lowering herself into the seat, hands folded in her lap, though they trembled slightly. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this about yesterday? Was she here to be scolded again this time by the man at the very top, or resigned? Something else? Ellison leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. His voice was calm, deliberate. Yesterday, a man walked into one of my shops. He asked for help, and almost everyone in that building treated him like a criminal, like a threat without listening to a word he said. He paused, his gaze steady on her. Except for you, her breath caught. She glanced at Ray, who stood silently, his eyes still, locked on her. Ellison continued, his tone hardening. That man is my brother, Ray Ellison. He helped me build this company from the ground up. Long before there were 10 locations, long before we had contracts and investors, it was just me and him working on cars in the cold. He stepped away years ago, but he still matters to me, to this company. And when I heard how he was treated yesterday, how my staff dismissed him, humiliated, Enteen's Alf, him, I was furious. Aaliyah's eyes widened, the revelation hitting her like a jolt. Brother, the biker, the man who had been written off as trash by everyone in the room. He was the CEO's brother. She turned toward Rai, who gave a faint shrug, his face unreadable, but his eyes carrying a quiet intensity. Ellison's voice cut through her shock. You didn't just fix a bike, you gave a father the chance to see his daughter before surgery. You reminded me and everyone in that shop what we claim to stand for: respect, service, humanity, and you did it when no one else would. Aaliyah felt her throat tighten, her hands gripping together harder. I wasn't trying to make a statement, she said softly, her voice catching. He needed help. Rai finally spoke, his voice low but steady. And you gave it, without hesitation, when everyone else turned their backs. You didn't blink. You saw me, not the patch, not the tattoos. Me? People don't expect that from someone like you. And they sure as hell don't expect it from someone like me. But you did it anyway. Silence stretched in the room, thick, but not hostile, heavy with something else. Truth, recognition. Ellison leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in thought. Your manager lost his job this morning, he said bluntly, effective immediately. Discrimination, whether racial, social, or visual, has no place under this roof. I will not tolerate it. Aaliyah's mouth parted in shock. Reynolds gone just like that. She hadn't thought it possible. Ellison reached for a folder on the desk, slid it across to her. I've reviewed your record. Your performance is among the PASR top 5% across every shop we own. Not a single formal complaint. Customers consistently report satisfaction with your work. That's not common at your age, and it shouldn't go unnoticed. He tapped the folder once firmly. We're offering you a promotion, lead technician for this location. A pay, increased benefits, a team of your own, and more than that, a chance to shape this shop into what it should have been all along. Aaliyah stared at the life folder, her hands frozen, her chest rising and falling fast. She blinked as hard, the edges of her vision blurring. She had walked into this room expecting reprimand, maybe humiliation, maybe nothing at all. She hadn't expected this. Her voice trembled when she spoke. I don't know what to say. Rai stepped forward, his voice rough but sure. Say yes because you earned it. Because you matter. Because yesterday, when no one else had the guts to act, you did. She looked at him, then back at Ellison, her heart thundering, her throat tight. She reached forward, her hand shaking slightly, and placed it on the folder. She didn't open it yet. She didn't need to. Ellison extended his hand across the table. His grip was firm, steady, absolute. Welcome to leadership, Miss Brown. She took it, her grip steady, despite the tremor in her chest. And in that moment, she felt something shift, not just in her life, but in her sense of herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming. The room was quiet as she rose from the chair, folder all in hand, and stepped back into the Prosegella hallway. Mechanics still clustered near the entrance, their whispers dying instantly as they saw her. No one laughed now. No one mocked. They simply parted, letting her pass through the center of them. the weight of their silence heavy but different. It wasn't judgment anymore. It was recognition. She pushed through the glass doors into the twilight of Michigan Avenue. The city buzzed around her headlights, flickering to life horns, blaring voices, calling. She exhaled deeply for the first time in days, feeling not the ache of being invisible, but the strength of being seen. And somewhere behind her in that conference room, Ray stood with his brother, silent, but certain, knowing that the choice she had made in a moment of isolation had changed everything for him, for her, for all of them. ChatGPT. Denoy Reynolds didn't take the news like a man who had been beaten fairly. He took it like a man who had been humiliated in front of the world, stripped of authority in the very place where he'd built his identity. And the bitterness that rose in him was darker than anger, closer to obsession. He sat in his apartment that night, lights low, a half-empty glass of whiskey sweating in his hand, replaying every word Ellison had said, every glance that had shifted away from him, every moment. He had been reduced to nothing. He had been in charge for 15 years. He had survived strikes, lawsuits, turnover, even scandals. And he had always landed on neither his feet because he knew how to play the game. But this being tossed aside for a dialenfrancy to 1-year-old black girl who hadn't even paid her dues, it was an insult he couldn't swallow. And in his bitterness, he began to plot. At first it was small, muttered words to his old drinking buddies about how the garage was falling apart, how Ellison had lost his mind, how the girl didn't deserve her title. But gossip is fuel, and Reynolds had a way of throwing sparks that landed just where he wanted. He whispered to suppliers, claimed she was reckless, careless with inventory, that her numbers didn't add up. He sent emails, under fake names, to customers suggesting they check their cars twice after letting her touch them, and slowly, almost invisibly, cracks began to appear. Inside the shop, the air grew colder. Aaliyah could feel it every morning when she walked in. Customers, who once greeted her warmly, now narrowed their eyes, asking pointed questions about the work, demanding reassurances they never asked from the men beside her, mechanics she had once tried to win over, now muttered behind her back, their words slithering into corners, carrying doubt. Even Kim at the front desk, who had never liked her, but at least tolerated her, now rolled her eyes louder, her gums snapping with contempt. "You sure you know what you're doing?" one customer asked her bluntly. One afternoon, his tone sharp, dismissive. She met his gaze and answered calmly, "Yes, sir, I do." But inside, her chest burned because she knew where it came from. Someone was feeding the fire. Ellison noticed the numbers first. Calls of complaint trickled in from customers who claimed jobs hadn't been done right, though the records showed otherwise. Online reviews, dipped overnight with anonymous accounts, blasting her by name. It didn't add up, but the damage was done. The reputation of the shop and of Aaliyah herself was bruised. One evening, long after the shop had closed, she stayed late at her bay, the weight of the whispers pressing, heavier than the wrench in her hand. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to set rebellent, find Ray, leaning in the doorway, his jacket half-zipped, his eyes steady on at her. He had been checking in quietly, since the day in the conference room, making sure she wasn't carrying it all alone. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked, his voice low but certain. Aaliyah wiped her hands on a rag, her shoulders sagging. "It's everywhere, like smoke. Doesn't matter how hard I work. Doesn't matter what I fix. People look at me like I've already failed. It's like they've made up their minds." Ray stepped closer, his boots heavy against the concrete, his presence grounding. "Reynolds," he said flatly. She didn't ask how he knew. She could see it in his face. He had lived too many years under the shadow of suspicion not to recognize when poison was being poured. "He's not finished," she said quietly. "Even after losing his job, he's still pulling strings. I can feel it." Ray's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Then we don't let him win. Not this time." His voice carried weight, the kind that came from living through betrayal, through being written off, through watching lies crush the truth. But Aaliyah's eyes dropped to the floor. "What if I can't stop it? What if this place falls because of me?" Ray shook his head, fierce. "No, don't you take that on. You're not the one dragging this place down. He is, and I'll prove it." The next few days were a blur. Rumors thickened, customers cancelled appointments, and the mechanics whispered more openly. "Now, she's not fit to lead," one said loud. "Enough for her to hear. She's bad for business," another muttered. Aaliyah kept her head high, kept working, but every comment chipped at her. Every sideways glance was another nail driven in. She went home at night, exhausted, not from the labor of her hands, but from the weight of being doubted. Reynolds, meanwhile, sat in bars and back rooms spinning his web wider. He told anyone who would listen that the girl was reckless, that she was dangerous, that the CEO had made a mistake. He posted online his words, dripping with venom, painting her as arrogant, incompetent, untrustworthy. And the worst part was that people believed him, because lies spoken with confidence travel faster than truths spoken softly. Ray watched it all with growing fury. He had promised himself once that he would never get pulled back into battles that weren't his. But this wasn't just about loyalty, it was about justice. He knew Reynolds was poisoning the air, and he knew words alone wouldn't clear it. He needed proof, and he needed to show the city, the customers, the world, that Aaliyah wasn't who Reynolds claimed she was. "One night," he called her. His voice was sharp, urgent. "Be at the shop tomorrow morning. Don't ask why. Just be there." She hesitated, her chest tight with unease. "Ray, what are you planning?" "Just trust me," he said, and then hung up. The next morning, Michigan Avenue trembled under the roar of engines. One by one, then by dozens, motorcycles lined the street, chrome glinting in the early light, the deep rumble shaking the windows of the shops nearby. People stopped on the sidewalks, pulling out phones, watching in awe as nearly 200 bikers rolled in behind Ray, their jackets marked with the same patch that had once drawn scorn inside the garage. They filled the block, engines idling like a chorus of thunder, the spectacle impossible to ignore. Aaliyah stepped outside, her eyes wide, her chest rising fast. She looked at Ray as he cut his engine and pulled off his helmet, his face set with determination. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice caught between shock and fear. Ray swung and his leg off the bike and stood tall, his voice carrying over the roar of engines and the murmur of the growing crowd. "I'm putting an end to this." He stepped forward, lifting a folder high in his hand. "Reynolds's lies end today. I have proof, emails, recordings, witnesses. Everything he's been spreading came from him. Every complaint, every review, every rumor. He tried to ruin you, to ruin this shop, because he couldn't stand that he lost." The crowd of bikers roared in approval, their voices echoing down the street, and the bystanders filming gasped. Aaliyah's eyes burned as she looked at Ray, the weight of his words pressing deep. "You don't fight lies with silence," Ray said, his voice fierce, turning to face the cameras now, recording every second. "You fight them with truth. And the truth is, this woman stood up when no one else would. She showed humanity when everyone else showed hate. She deserves respect, not suspicion. And as long as I breathe, as long as we ride, she won't stand alone." The bikers behind him roared again, the sound like thunder rolling down Michigan Avenue, shaking the glass of the garage windows, Phones streamed live comments, pouring in as people across the city, maybe even across the country, watched. Inside his apartment, Reynolds sat on his couch watching the live stream, his face red, his fist slamming against the armrest. "No, no, no," he muttered, his rage boiling over. He grabbed his phone, dialed furiously, but no one answered. The walls were closing in, and for the first time, he felt the inevitability of his downfall. Moments later, a knock rattled his door hard, relentless. "Chicago PD, open up." Reynolds froze, his heart pounding, his chest constricting. He backed away from the door, shaking, his head muttering, "It's not supposed to end like this." But the knock came. Again, loud or final. On Michigan Avenue, Aaliyah stood at the curb, her chest tight, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't try to hide. She turned to Ray, her voice breaking but steady. "Why are you doing this for me?" Ray's eyes softened, his voice low, almost breaking too. "Because no one should have to pay the price for doing the right thing. And because you reminded me of who I used to be. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost. Now it's my turn." The engines roared again. The cameras rolled, and the city watched as the truth at last broke through the lies. And in that moment, Aaliyah felt something shift, not just in the eyes of the crowd around her, but in the marrow of her own bones. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was standing. And this time, she wasn't standing alone. The roar of engines on Michigan Avenue did not fade. It grew layer upon layer, the low thunder of 200 Harleys, vibrating through the pavement, rattling windows and drawing hundreds of bystanders who pressed against the sidewalks. Phones lifted, high faces lit by the glow of their screens as live streams spread the spectacle across the city in real time. The street was no longer just a street. It had become a stage, and every second was being captured, broadcast, judged, and at the center of it stood Aaliyah Brown Grease, still smudged across her coveralls, her curls damp with sweat, her chest rising fast as she looked at the army of bikers, flanking Ray, their patches catching the winter sun, a wall of loyalty that blocked out every whisper of doubt. Ray held the folder high, his voice cutting, sharp and steady over the growl of engines. "This is the truth," he said, shaking the papers so the cameras caught it. Emails, text calls. Every word. Reynolds spread to smear her name, to ruin this shop, to poison your trust. All of it traced back to him. Every lie, every rumor, every piece of dirt you've been fed. It came from one man who couldn't stand that he lost. He pointed, "Has the same, same," back toward the garage, toward the walls, that had once turned Aaliyah into an embarrassed outsider. And the worst part, most of you believed him because it was easier to believe a lie about someone who didn't look like what you thought a leader should look like. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People leaned closer to their screens, comments pouring in on live streams, hashtags already forming in real time. "Stand with Aaliyah" flashed on feeds within minutes. On the sidewalk, one customer who had muttered about her work days earlier shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away from the cameras. The truth was unraveling in front of them, and no one could look away. Ray's voice grew, harder, every word like a hammer, striking steel. This woman, this young mechanic, stood up when no one else would. She put her job on the line for a post of man she didn't know, for a man everyone else judged and turned away. She saw me, not the jacket, not the ink, not the patch. She saw a father begging to reach, to being his daughter, and because of her, I made it. I held my little girl's hand when she woke up from surgery. I got to tell her I loved her. You tell me, what's that worth? How do you measure that? Aaliyah swallowed hard, her throat tight, tears threatening to spill, but she held them back, standing tall beside him. The crowd shifted the weight of his words, pressing on them like a tide. And then, as if on cue, Ray turned toward her, his voice softer, but no less firm. "You didn't just fix a bike, you saved a family, and I'll be damned if I let anyone drag your name through the mud." For that, behind them, the bikers roared, their engines firing loud, the sound rolling down the street like a wave. The energy surged, palpable, electric. People in the crowd cheered, some raising fists, some chanting her name. "Aaliyah, Aaliyah." It started small, a handful of voices, but it spread louder and louder until it filled the avenue. Inside his apartment, across town, Reynolds sat, hunched in front of his television, his face pale, sweat dripping down his temple. He had thought he controlled the narrative. He had thought his whispers and posts would bury her, but now the truth was roaring on every screen, louder than anything he could silence. His hand trembled as he lifted his glass, whiskey sloshing, his lips pressed tight in rage. "This isn't how it ends," he muttered. "Not like this," he hurled, the glass at the wall, the shatter, echoing in the empty room. But the knock on his door came almost immediately. Firm, deliberate, unmistakable. "Chicler, PD, open up." Reynolds froze, his chest seized, his eyes darted, his mind racing for an exit that didn't exist. The knock came again, harder, a command this time. "Mr. Reynolds." Reynolds opened the door. "We have a warrant." He staggered back, hands shaking, whispering, They can't pin this on me." But the truth was already out. He had left a trail of spite in emails and calls, and Ray had collected every piece. The law, it wasn't here to ask. They were here to take on Michigan Avenue. The scene unfolded like a festival of justice. The police cruiser rolled up quietly at Dubjon. First lights, flashing sirens muted, but the crowd noticed parting as two officers stepped out. They didn't approach the bikers. They walked straight toward the garage entrance. Someone in the crowd shouted, "It's for..." Reynolds' phone swung, cameras zoomed, voices lifted. The live streams caught it all. Officers disappearing into the building, the murmurs swelling until the sight came. Reynolds dragged out in cuffs, his face red, his eyes darting wildly, shouting protests that no one believed. "This is a setup. She's lying. They're all lying." His voice cracked, desperate, but the jeers of the crowd drowned him. "Liar, racist, get him out." Aaliyah stood still, her heart pounding, her breath uneven. She had imagined justice maybe, but never like this. Never so public, never with the weight of hundreds of voices, thousands online, all watching, all bearing witness. She felt the ground shift under her feet, not from fear, but from the magnitude of what was happening. Ray stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, his voice low so only he could hear. "It's over. He can't touch you now." She nodded, unable to find words, her chest swelling with something beyond relief. Something like vindication, though heavier, because vindication never erased the scars of what came before. Still, she stood, taller. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. The bikers shut off their pendrid engines one by one. The sudden silence, almost deafening after hours of thunder. The crowd clapped, cheered, their voices filling the gap. Phones lowered, slowly, people wiping tears, strangers, looking at each other with the same thought on their faces. They had just witnessed something bigger than a class dispute in a garage. They had seen a fight for dignity, for truth, for humanity, and the right side had won. A reporter elbowed her way to the front, microphone thrust toward Aaliyah. "How does it feel knowing the whole city just watched you clear your name?" Aaliyah blinked, her voice soft but clear. "It's not about my name. It's about doing the right thing, even when it costs you. That's what matters. That's what I'll carry." The words rippled through the Stein crowd, Repeated, recorded, captioned, destined to travel further than she ever imagined. And in that moment, Aaliyah realized the truth. She hadn't just defended herself, she had become a groom, symbol of something bigger. The bikers began to disperse slowly, engines rumbling back to life, the street clearing as if a storm had passed. Rai lingered, his eyes on her, his face softer now than she had ever seen it. "You'll be all right," he said. "Better than all right. They'll respect you now. Not because you asked for it, because you took it." She met his gaze, her throat tight, and whispered, "Thank you for standing with me." Rai shook his head. "You stood first. I just made sure." They saw it. The last of the bikes pulled away, their tail lights disappearing into the distance. The crowd-thinned chatter lingering like the mansions, echo of thunder, and when the street finally settled, when the noise dimmed, and the cameras turned off, Aaliyah stood alone for a moment on the curb, the city alive around her, her heart steadier than it had been in weeks. She had lost a job, but she had found something greater. She had lost the silence of invisibility, but she had found a voice that carried. And as she looked down Michigan Avenue, the city, stretching endless before her, she knew this was not an ending at all. It was a beginning. The following morning, the garage on Michigan Avenue no longer looked like the same place Aaliyah had walked into only days before. The air carried a different weight, less of the heavy silence that once clung to its resented walls, more of a cautious hum, like a room that knew it was about to be rewritten. Reporters had staked out across the street, their cameras aimed at the doors, and customers who might once have turned away now walked in with momentum, curious glances, some lingering a second longer when their eyes met hers. Inside, the mechanics were quieter, their usual banter stripped down, their eyes shifting toward her and then away, as if they weren't ready yet to acknowledge the truth that had unfolded in front of the whole city. Aaliyah stood by her bay, hands resting on the edge of her toolbox, heart pounding in her chest, not from fear anymore, but from the enormity of the moment. She felt different, like the girl who had crouched beside Ray's bike only days ago had been burned down and remade in the fire of everything that followed. She was still, herself grease-stained, callous, tired, but she wasn't invisible anymore. And that was a weight she was still learning to carry. The sound of heavy boots cut through the stillness. She turned, and there was Rai pushing through the double doors with the kind of quiet gravity that made the entire room shift. He wasn't alone this time. Two bikers flanked him, men older than him, gray, streaks in their beards, patches worn and faded. They carried themselves like men who had seen too much and had no first interest in pretending otherwise. The shop went silent at their entrance, the mechanics stiffening, the receptionist, nails frozen above her keyboard, customers glancing nervously. The presence of Hell's Angels in daylight, in business hours inside a garage. It was a sight no one could ignore. Ray's eyes locked on Aaliyah, steady, unwavering, as he walked the length of the shop. When he reached her bay, he stopped, close enough that she could see the wear in his jacket, the roughness in his hands, the softness in his eyes that wasn't there before. He didn't raise his voice, didn't perform for the others. Watching, his words were for her. "I came to thank you properly this time." Aaliyah's throat tightened, her voice caught, but she managed. "You don't need to thank me." Ray shook his head slowly, firm. "Yes, I do. Because what you did, for me, for my daughter, for my family, I'll carry that the rest of my life. You gave me something no money, no power, no patch on my back could ever guarantee. You gave me time with her, and there's no repaying that. But I can stand here and make sure you know it mattered, that you mattered." His voice, low and rough, carried through the shop anyway, reaching every ear, leaving no one untouched. The mechanics shifted, uncomfortably. some looking down at their boots, some at her guilt, flickering across their faces. Kim at the desk chewed her gum, slower eyes, narrowing as if trying to understand a clang, a stained world that had just tilted under her feet. The customers leaned closer, sensing history in the making. Aaliyah blinked against the sting in her eyes, her lips parting, but no words came. She had been called rookie kid, worthless, disposable. She had been ignored, so she too, dismissed, laughed at, but never had anyone spoken to her like this. Never had anyone looked at her and said she mattered out loud. It pierced deeper than the insults ever had. Ray continued, his tone harder now. Not for her, but for the room. She stood alone in this place. Every one of you turned your backs. You saw me walk in. You saw a patch, and you decided I wasn't worth it your time. She saw a man begging for his daughter, and while you laughed, he whispered, she worked. And because of that, she's the reason I didn't miss. The one moment I couldn't afford to miss. You all know what that means. And if you don't, you better learn. The weight of his words pressed on the shop, pressing down until no one could meet his eyes. For the first time, Aaliyah saw some of the same men who had mocked her shift on their feet, shame written plain across their faces. Then Ray turned back to her, his gaze softening. Again, you told me you weren't trying to be a hero, that you were just trying to be human. Well, maybe that's what makes a hero in the first place. A tear slipped down Aaliyah's cheek, uninvited but unstoppable. She didn't wipe it away. She let it stand. Her voice, when it finally came, was raw, quiet, but steady. I just wanted to do what was right, even if it cost me. Ray nodded. And that's why you'll never stand alone. Again. Not while I breathe. Not while we ride. The two bikers behind him stepped forward, slightly silent, but solemn, their presence reinforcing his words, and for the first time, Aaliyah understood that this wasn't just gratitude. It was protection. It was allegiance. It was something far larger than her wrapping around her in a way that made her feel both humbled and lifted. From the back office, footsteps echoed. Thomas Ellison emerged, his goodnight expression firm, composed, but with the faint trace of pride in his eyes. He joined them at the bay, his voice carrying the weight of leadership, but softened by conviction. What Ray says is true. Yesterday, this shop failed. It failed him. It failed you. It failed itself. But it doesn't have to stay that way. This is where it changes. He looked at the mechanics, his gaze sharp, demanding. You will respect her. You will follow her lead. Not because she's my choice, not because of what happened yesterday, but because she earned it. Every damn day, she earned it. And if you can't see that, then you don't belong here. Silence thickened, no one daring to speak. Aaliyah's chest swelled, the weight of Ellison's words anchoring. The truth she had fought so hard to prove. She wasn't just surviving the system anymore. She was leading it. Ellison turned back to her, his voice lower now for her alone. You reminded me of why this company was built in the first place, and I won't forget it. For the first time, Aaliyah didn't feel the urge to shrink when eyes fell on her. She straightened her hands, no longer trembling, her voice stronger than she thought possible. I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here to be fair, to work hard to make this place better. If anyone wants to stand in the way of that, they can try. But I won't back down. The words weren't rehearsed. They weren't polished. But they were real, and they landed with a finality that settled over the shop like a new foundation. Ray gave a small smile. The first real one she'd seen from him, crooked and full of grit. That's the woman I shook hands with. That's the one I trusted without even knowing her name. The shop exhaled a long silence broken, not by words, but by something deeper. The recognition that the ground had shifted. and wouldn't shift back. Later that day, as the sun dipped behind the skyline and the streetlights blinked to life, Aaliyah stepped outside. The city rushed around her, indifferent and alive. But tonight, she felt the hum of it, differently. Her chest was lighter, her steps steadier. She had walked into this place invisible. Now she walked out, seeing respected, and for the first time, free from the weight of wondering if she belonged. She knew she did. Rai lingered. By the curb, his bike idling, the headlight cutting through the dusk. He looked at her once more, his voice low, but sure. Don't forget, you're never alone. Not anymore. She nodded, the words sinking deep, not as a promise to rely on, but as a reminder that the fight she had waged wasn't wasted. She had won more than her job. She had won her voice. As he rode off, the roar of his engine blending into the city's rhythm, Aaliyah closed her eyes and breathed deep, the cold air filling her lungs. She wasn't just existing anymore. She was becoming, and that made all the difference. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.